What we're going to talk today, it's about the power of athlete stories. And the idea is that we can learn about injury preventions with the ones that really do it. Have no conflict of interest to declare. And what we have as a learning objective today, the idea is that we're going to try to understand a bit more how we can recognize the value of patients and athletes' voice in our clinical practice, translate the knowledge from qualitative to practice, and also to develop critical view of the current evidence, considering also the athlete's perspective. And to do that, what I would do is I would talk a little bit about the road of sports injury prevention research, but also a little bit of my own road, and also the gaps that we find in this way. Paul just introduced me, and as it says, I am a postdoc researcher in Amsterdam. I know that Aspetar is also one of the IOC research centers. I'm also a teacher at the Master Sports Physiotherapy in Hogeschool Utrecht in the Netherlands. But I come from Brazil. I did my master's in public health there. And I work in quite different clinical settings. So I was physiotherapist of a big multi-sports club in Brazil, that we have talent development, but also the Olympic athletes. I was physio of the Brazilian national team, gymnastics, and had therapists of different Cirque du Soleil shows. And meanwhile, I was also primary care physiotherapist in one of those poor communities in Brazil. So you can see all the stage and the beautiful of Cirque du Soleil and different shows that I worked with, and the big staff that we have. We have 50 artists and 50 staff, so you can imagine that it's half-half. So they can be pampered. But I also had this reality. And those kids, they do have sports injuries, but I can say I never saw one. I never saw one kid come to me because they had an ankle sprain. One of those kids playing football in a favela in Brazil, barefoot, they do have an ankle, they do have a knee, and they get sports injuries. But you can imagine that prevention and healthcare, it's a completely different process in this context. So if we look to different contexts, a young, poor athlete, an elite athlete, or just a recreational runner, they have a completely different perspective, despite all of them having, for instance, the same knee, the same ACL, the same structure. But this knee will belong to a specific athlete, and this athlete participates in specific sports. And these sports, it's part of a specific association in a specific country. And these athletes have specific perspectives, beliefs, attitudes regarding injury prevention, but also regarding the importance of sport for them. The sports sometimes have a specific sports culture, and the level is completely different if we're talking about amateur or elite. The associations usually have their own regulations and their own budgets and the governing rules. And then it comes the country. And the country have their own care structure, the popularity of the sport. About a few weeks ago, we had the Neymar surgery of his ACL. And I remember was one of the biggest things that we had in the news in Brazil was exactly an ACL surgery going on, just because of the popularity of the sports. And you can imagine that his process will be different than one of those many ACL surgeries that happen around the world and nobody ever heard about. But that day was one that we had all around the news. And we study a lot about the knee, with that idea that we can fix everything if we simplify things. And this is related to one way that we learn mostly health sciences. It's the biomedical model. It's what we call the positivist approach. We find one solution, one cause, and we take away the effect, and then that's the solution that we have. And it's not a problem to use this type of idea. It works really well for many of the solutions that we propose. One of them, for instance, that many of you probably know, sequence of prevention. This model from back on the 90s from Van Mechelen, it's a very simple model. 4 steps to develop sports injury prevention research. Step 1, you should check the extent of the problem. How many injuries do I have? What is the burden of that injury? So it's mostly the epidemiological studies that we would do. Then after that, we check why this injury happened. Which are the mechanisms? Which are the risk factors? And then for the preventive measure, a simple idea. Positivist effect, positivist approach. I take away that risk factor and then I measure again, does it work or not? And I must say, it works. We know that it's possible to prevent injuries. I say on average we can prevent around 50% of injuries based on many of the RCTs that we have. I would not put a reference here because this is kind of a general number that I would say, because for hamstring we have numbers above 70%. For ACL we get sometimes close to 50%. And for other injuries we also have something like that. So let's say that on average we are able to prevent 50% of injuries. But then we get to one problem. Real world implementation. People are not using, or maybe are using in a different way. And from back in the 90s, this type of evidence helped us a lot to build a lot of strong evidence that we are able to do, but how we do in the real world. And then in the 2000s, Caroline Finch decided, this model needs 2 more steps. We do the 4 steps, but then after that, we start to talk about the word that I will repeat a lot today, context. Then we check if that intervention works in the context and if it works in that context. So what is the context and if it works there. Problem is, when they start to do that, they realize that they didn't have enough knowledge about the context. And I really like this figure because it's a clear example of something that works really well, but will not work in this context. So it works. It's just in a wrong context. And the other analogy that I like to do, it's this car. It's a Formula 1 car, can go over 300 kilometers. And if we talk about this one specific, last Sunday we had the last race, broke all the records. But to break all the records, we need the driver, amazing team, amazing Formula 1 tracks. We need everything. We need perfect conditions. But this is the reality where we need to implement most of our interventions. So we create the perfect solution. And then later on we realize, the implementation context might not be exactly fitting for the product that I invented. So it's the problem of the model or the problem of our view. This is the way that we usually think about injury prevention. We look to an injury, and an injury, it's an injury. An ankle sprain, it's an ankle sprain, doesn't matter who. The isolated risk factors, create a solution, a context-free intervention that should fit everywhere. And then we build our Formula 1 car. And later on, when we try to implement, we realize that we have a context that doesn't really fit or doesn't perform as well as we want. What if we start already with that design thinking and think, before I even start, where do I need to implement? Which injury it is, but also what is the context of these injuries? What is the contextual determinants that can be influencing this injury? And then we build a solution for that specific injury. And to be honest, a 4x4 probably perform much better in this environment if we already know where we need to be racing. And then it comes another word that I would say here today, complexity. Usually I say that the context, it's just another way to look to the complexity. The context usually show a lot of levels. There is many things influencing. And the idea of complex, that sports injuries are complex, it's something that it's becoming more and more said, despite being quite theoretical, I would agree. And the idea of complexity is that we need to understand all the dynamic interrelations between not only the physical, but the biological, the economic, and the social aspects. So you can see all those layers that I was mentioning before related to the context. But why this influence our practice? Well, as soon as I assume that my problem is complex, I will need to change the way that I work. I will see different, I will think different, and I will also have to act in a different way. And then I will start with something that it sounds quite theoretical, bear with me. This iceberg will represent the idea that we end up changing methods. And I will start with the ontology, go into the epistemology, the methodology, and then the methods. Wait a second. What is ontology? And it sounds like a difficult word. We use a lot of more like a philosophical way. But to be honest, ontology, it's just those glasses. It's the lenses that we put when we look to the world. It refers to our view of reality. And as soon as we accept that sports injuries are complex, we put lenses of complexity. We try to look to this problem in a different way. So sports injuries are complex. So what should I do it? Well, I also need to change my epistemology. And Sherlock Holmes is there because epistemology is about what can be known and how you can know it. How can I investigate something? And would be enough if I just use, for instance, quantitative methods and a positivistic approach to answer my questions? If it's a complex problem, we need to produce knowledge that can deal with that. And that sometimes you need a diversity of methods. And then you have the methodology, that it's the theory of methods. And also will define new research questions for the field and also a new set of methods. And maybe what we need to do is answer not if something worked, but for whom, when, where, how, and why. And then we will need new methods. Because then I need to know how people behave or what is the context. I need to know how and why people do injury prevention, or maybe how and why they don't. And for that, we need qualitative methods. It's not one or the other, it's to complement. And I really believe that athlete stories can help us to find some of the missing pieces of the complex, of the context, and also help us to get more pieces of this puzzle. And that's one of the things that I most did. This was the cover of my PhD back in 4 years ago. And I tried to really apply the qualitative methods to understand how and why people do injury prevention, mostly in elite level. And what I will do from now on, I will not talk so much about the results itself, but the lessons that I learned by listening to athlete stories. And one, it's that we need more than numbers to tell the full story. And you know, in numbers, we believe. And I really like this example that it's a study that they did, that they gave the same data set to a team of 20 statisticians. And they found completely different outcomes. 20 teams, exactly the same data set, already treated. 69% found a significant effect. 9 teams, 1/3, found no significant effect. And amongst the one that really found the effect changed very, really a lot. But you know, in numbers we trust. It's a yes or no. And injury prevention, it's not an exact science. We create a world of dichotomous decisions. You either is or it's not. That's one of the things. It's yes or no. And we know that many of our athletes need to tick a box when they need to answer some of the self-reported measures that we have, right? But sometimes the answer is, it depends. Maybe. And one of the things, for instance, it's how we collect data of injury. Maybe if we look to how athletes perceive sports injuries or how they define that. Maybe we need to check for the theoretical definitions that we have, for instance, time loss or the need of seek for medical care, and how exactly the athletes perceive that. One of the studies that we performed was with 19 semi-structured interviews, athletes, coaches, and physios. Those were all really high-level athletes. They were representing their country in Olympics or World Championships and their staff. And they said, there is pain, there is symptoms. But for me, when I have pain, I'm not injured because I can keep going. And they said, maybe the first question that I would do would be, does it hamper my performance? For me, an injury, it's when I cannot perform as usual and cannot perform at my best. Those athletes need to perform their best all the time. So their reference, it's their best performance. And then they would say, yes, then I'm injured or not. I'm not injured. But then, even if they consider themselves injured, they will not stop. Can I still play? And these athletes say, well, I participated in the European Championship. It was very important for me, and I just kept going, even with pain. And then the next thing that they would try to do, it's manage themselves. Well, it really depends on your schedule. Sometimes you have to see which matches you have ahead, and you take some painkillers and go through it. Till now, none of them arrive to us, clinical staff. Just when they cannot solve their issues, then they would come to either the coach or the medical team. They would say, you know what, now it's something that stopped my practice. And that's like, it's the end of the process. So you can imagine how many layers there is when we see, for instance, one of those epidemiological studies, especially when we consider that those athletes need to self-report. Their decision-making, it's going through that. And maybe in the same moment they would say yes, and other moments they would say no. And also the different contexts. Think about recreational athletes. We did a similar study with recreational athletes in the Netherlands, runners. Runners are the ones that just want to keep running. And they say, well, there is load, running it's a load, then there is a complaint, and then sometimes I do too much, I start to have a complaint. Then I skip a training. I change my pace. Instead of going to my 10K run, I do a 5. I wouldn't consider myself injured. But then when I lose my autonomy, that's the criteria that I have to consider myself injured. Can you see the difference of criteria that we have here? While for the athlete, elite athlete, it's about the best performance, this one, they just want to run. They just want to have the autonomy to make their own decisions. And when they cannot, then they consider themselves injured. What about dancers? We did the same study as well, same research question with the National Dutch Ballet, which is the 5th biggest company that we have in Europe, all professional dancers, and also their artistic staff. And they say it's an injury spectrum. And one of the last quotes here, they say, I think there are different levels of injuries. There are some injuries that you can work through it. And they clearly say it's a gray area. During the interviews and the focus groups, they were like almost mad with us that they had to find one definition. They said there are many. There is different things that we are talking about here. So how we define an injury depends who we ask and even the moment that we ask. And there is, yes, sometimes a clear, yes, you are injured. And sometimes you have someone that is healthy and have no injury. But there is this gray area there. And we keep having to make those dichotomous decisions without looking to any other option. And I think one of the most beautiful moments that we had recently was exactly a clear example of a dichotomous decision that they found another solution. So maybe we need to be open to different solutions as well. The other point that I have in my lesson, it's every evidence has a context. I start here talking about the some of the results of the RCTs, and this is from the Aspetar Journal from 2018. It's a paper from James O'Brien and other colleagues. And they use the numbers of the knee control program, that it's a program to reduce ACL injuries. And on the top there, you can find the beautiful number, much above the 50% that I mentioned, 64% in the RCT of injury reduction. But then you can see that people need to know about the program, use it right, and keep using. And when you go to all those layers, those were hypothetical numbers, but I know that Martin Haglund once mentioned that they got quite similar numbers when they really did this study. And the problem that we have here, it's related to the way that we think about cause. I will go back to the positivist approach. RCTs make sense to make one of the kinds of causal claim that we have. It works somewhere claims. What we can say is that 64% intervention gives that outcome under that its specific conditions. And then we have two other causal claims that we need more than just a randomized control trial to answer. If that thing will work somewhere, and even the most important one for a clinician, does it work for me, for my patient? And in that study, in the specific knee control, they did a qualitative study. And this is what you got from the coaches. I think the quality of the execution will be low compared to what an expert consider quality. Or then, if you, for example, have 75 minutes of training on artificial turf, and it's cold weather, you need to keep everybody warm. Then you must warm up, do stretches, do the knee control program, do some technique drills, aerobic training. There is not enough time for the program. What they end up doing, most of the time we only use selected exercises. Then you know why there is that big drop. It's almost a new program. But those coaches, they don't do that out of not being interested. It's related to their context. And then there is also the athletes that have their own opinions about. The other study that was done by colleagues from Sweden with handball, the athletes said, well, the program is just boring. We do handball. I want to use the ball as much as possible, so include the ball during the preventive training. And with the athletes that have more experience, what they say sometimes it's, what I do, it's what makes me feel good. I've been through the years working with many different people. And then I do a little bit of my research, but by the end they do what feels good. So the context that we have in the RCTs might be quite different, right? And then we have also the context of a number. This is a quote from a performance coach from women's football. And he say, well, this year we won a prize, we're going to win another trophy, but we have less player availability. How can you define success? There is a context for that number. And then sometimes you can have even 21, 22 players available, but you are missing the key one. Is that a good number or not? So there is a context behind that number. And they know that because they are the experts of the field. And then let's get another one, return to sports, which is one of the ways that we think about injury prevention because we want to avoid new injury. And I know that we have different studies that, in this one specific, we got 85% of individuals returning to sport after the first ACL. But what I'm doing recently, I interview athletes from the moment that they get injured through their process of return to sport. And now that I'm doing probably the fourth or the fifth interview with them, they are starting to get ready to return. And look what's going on. People are really anxious about my return. The fans, the reporters, I'm ready to be back, but they, the team, don't want me back to the group. If I'm available, there will be pressure, and they don't want this. The team is doing well, they are playing well. And if I'm back, there will be pressure from media, from sponsors to put me in. And the coach doesn't want this. It's all influencing. They say they are waiting for the safest return, but I'm ready and no one wants to make the decision. This athlete is waiting to have a chance to play again because visibility will be one of the key points for her to be able to go to Paris, which will be probably her third Olympic. But now she has a problem that in the team, there is a new player that replaces her. The team is doing well. There is sponsors, there is media. That's the main thing influencing that number that we talk about. Or even the timeline. Some sports don't have competitions in specific moments. So you can say you can go back, but there is no competition right now. This athlete, for instance, also waiting for Paris. In January, I would be clear to compete. And we will decide. We can wait to March, but it's the hardest competition. So I want to get to one competition before the Olympic trial. That will be in April. So in January, we will decide. What is playing a role for this athlete to really go back to the first competition? It's mostly competition timeline and the options that she has. Much more than what we would think about strength condition or limb asymmetry. And I think one important point about sports, it's the ones that don't come back. And we usually think that the ones that don't come back, it's because we didn't do a good job. And one of the athletes that I'm following this study decided to stop the career. After few surgeries, she just said, I know in my heart I don't want to stop. But in my mind, that's the best thing for my body. A part of me say, it's your life. If you want to do something else, she's looking for the options. She's still young. She can do something else. And she just don't want to feel pain anymore. This athlete, it's not coming back not because she didn't succeed in the physical rehab. It's mostly about her food process. And maybe she already came back 5 or 6 times before from surgeries. So we need to remember also that context, it's time dependent. Decisions that were made in one moment can be different in a different moment. And I like this quote from Heraclitus that say, no man ever enters in the same river twice, because it's not the same river and it's also not the same man. Temporality, it's an important thing that I learned with athlete stories. And we can use also quantitative to see that. I really like this comparison that they did recently with Ronaldinho and Vinicius. And despite having a relatively similar timeline in the way that they work in their career, Vinicius already have 3 times as many career minutes played compared to Ronaldinho in the same age. So there is this generation also gap and the temporality that we need to consider that the sports change, not only the player, but also all the demands of the sports. If we look, for instance, for women's football, I'm interviewing athletes as well, and then they say, well, where I am right now, I'm really happy. But in the past, I had to work, I had to study, I had to do everything, and I never heard about injury prevention. I even didn't have health care. And now I'm very lucky. I have top injury prevention, I have all the resources available, and in the future, they think that they can get even more if they look to the men's game. What we see is that there is a big difference on the athlete's journey. And maybe those young athletes there in the corner, they need a different intervention than the elite athletes in the end of the road. And there is a lot of things going on. This is a study that we did with Belgian athletes going to the Olympics. And when they talk about injury prevention, they say, you know what? When I was young, that was the moment that I had to do something different. But during their career, they get exposed to sports culture. They have the experience of getting injured, but also to become more mature, to learn with the team, usually a multidisciplinary team. And then later on, they get exposed to all the resources and facilities that you have in an elite sports context. And what they say, well, I had a ACL twice. It's a big injury. I know it's so important to do this in case injury prevention, so I can keep on staying on the court. So that's the main thing. I don't want to be injured. And then, even that, I wish I knew more. I think I could have prevented a lot more. So the athletes in different moments, they also perceive this change regarding their behavior for injury prevention. And then my last lesson, who is the real expert? We tend to say that we know more because of the knowledge that we have. But the knowledge that the athletes have and also other stakeholders in the field, it's really relevant. It's about perspective. There is not a much better or a much worse of that. It's just different views. We might be looking to one side and seeing the sea, the land, and then the other one is saying, oh, thank God, I see a boat. The perspective and the value of different perspectives, it shows the value of the experts of the context. In one of the studies that I conducted with Cirque du Soleil, I asked which were the factors related to injury occurrence. And this is an answer from our artistic director. Many things, how the artists manage their bodies, how they come to the table, what's their discipline, what's their work on the daily basis in comparison to what they do for preparation, maintenance, mental state, external influences, anything that's not letting them be in the tip-top shapes in their brains, accidents, and then personal problems, distractions, whether they are happy, worried, what they have to do, the team, the environment. So it's a lot of things. This is our artistic director. He's not a health professional. He doesn't deal with sports injuries on a daily basis. But you can see that he understands the context where he comes from. And there is a value to ask those things to them because they have this broad view. And the artists, for instance, they would say, it's not one specific exercise. If you are healthy, you need to eat good, you need to work, lifestyle, mindset. It's not about one exercise that will change your life. It will not change your life, your act, but it's a lot of stuff. So the idea that they can see how big it's the contextual factors influence, it's something that shows how important it's to ask athletes and other stakeholders from the field to have a better understanding. In Cirque, for instance, what we try to do with all those interviews, it's kind of map all the system around the injuries. So they talk, for instance, about load, but load could be physical load, mental load, and then after that on the physical load could be training load and could be show load. And then the show load depends on the number of shows, but the number of shows depends on the decision of the high management and the company manager. And then you can see that many people in some way would be influencing sports injuries in that case. We did a similar study here with Qatar football, and we saw the same thing. The amount of people that would be influencing, that would be the player, the head coach. The fitness coach was seen as one of the key components for exchanging information with the physio and the team doctor. But by the end, everyone had to have the same mission. So it's a bunch of people working together to do injury prevention. But again, one important thing came out, context. And in the case of the study that there was done here, there was, for instance, the environmental context, of course, the weather, the humidity, the competition context. Different countries have different cups and competition schedules. The team context, that in that case was mentioned, that was quite international and multidisciplinary, but everyone comes with their own beliefs. And the cultural context with lifestyle and the cultural beliefs that could be also influencing the injury prevention. So I hope that I could convince you that athlete stories can complement our view and teach us more about their context and their realities. And this puzzle, well, I think we need to thank a lot already current studies that already show some of the pieces of the puzzle that we know that can prevent injuries. But if we ask athletes, we can get more pieces without still not finishing the puzzle. But we can know, for instance, that communication, experience, sports culture play a role in injury prevention. So what's the power of athlete stories? I think it helps us, before anything, understand the problem in the context. And every context will be unique. The one-size-fits-all solutions, they will not really work for different contexts. And to do that, we also need to explore the different perspectives. And I really like this figure. We sometimes don't perceive the water that we are swimming in. And then this all will help us to broaden up our view. And I think there is something that it's really valuable from doing qualitative studies. We also empower athletes to tell their stories, but also to be active in their solutions. And I feel that involving the athlete, it's just the start. We can do more. We can also collaborate with them. And there is some studies being done. This is one of the studies from Eva Arenberg and colleagues in Sweden. And it's a co-creation. They put researchers, they put coaches, they put athletes together, and they try to build injury prevention for that context. And I think that's something that still we have a long way to go, a good road. So my message will be listen, involve, and let them show the way sometimes. Explore the different perspectives and contexts. We do that by listening very often and questioning. And be bold, be open, and build solutions together. And I know that many of you have clinic today, and I would just propose one exercise. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the athletes. Try to look the world to their perspective. They can teach us a lot. Thank you very much.